The overhead bins rattled as Flight 447 cut through turbulence at 32,000 feet. Somewhere in row 14, a woman's voice cracked with panic. "Is anyone a doctor? Please, someone help!" Passengers craned their necks. A middle-aged man had collapsed in the aisle, his face pale as fog. Flight attendants rushed forward, their practiced smiles replaced with tight-lipped urgency. The lead attendant, Christine, knelt beside him while fumbling with an emergency kit. From seat 23C, a small hand shot up. "Excuse me." The voice was young but clear. "My dad works for the FAA. He taught me the emergency medical protocol for flights." Christine's head snapped toward the voice. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stood in the aisle. He wore a royal blue jacket with junior aviator wings pinned to the collar. His dark eyes were steady despite the chaos. "Sit down, sweetie." Christine's tone dripped with condescension. "The adults will handle this." "But I know the procedure," the boy insisted. "You need to check for—" I said, "Sit down." Christine stood, her smile now a weapon. She raised her voice so nearby passengers could hear. "Everyone, please ignore this child. Some kids make up stories for attention during emergencies. It's dangerous and inappropriate." Laughter rippled through the cabin. A woman in 22B whispered loudly, "Kids these days, always pretending." The boy's face burned crimson. His hand dropped to his side. Behind him, a man in first class lowered his newspaper, eyes narrowing at the scene. But he didn't move. "Not yet." Christine returned to the collapsed passenger, her authority restored. The boy sank into his seat, small fingers touching the aviator wings as if checking they were still real. The plane shuddered through another pocket of rough air. Outside the window, clouds churned like silent accusations. "Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. If you believe children deserve to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe for more justice stories. You won't believe what happens when the boy's father finally stands up. 6 hours earlier, Marcus Crawford had stood in the airport terminal with his backpack and a laminated card hanging from his neck. "Unaccompanied minor." His mother kissed his forehead 3 times. Her eyes red from crying she pretended was allergies. "You'll see Dad in 4 hours," she whispered. "He's so excited. And remember, I know, Mom, stay in my seat. Listen to the flight attendants. Don't talk to strangers." Marcus recited it like a prayer he'd memorized. But inside, his heart hammered with something bigger than rules. This was his first solo flight, his first real taste of the world his father lived in. The aviator wings pinned to his jacket weren't toys from a gift shop. His father had given them to him last Christmas, with a ceremony that felt official. "You've earned these, Marcus. You know more about aviation safety than most adults." That night, they'd stayed up until midnight, reviewing FAA regulations like other families watched movies. Now, boarding Flight 447, Marcus walked down the jetway with his chin up. The airplane smelled like recycled air and cleaning solution. Rows of seats stretched ahead like a tunnel to adventure. He found 23C, stowed his backpack, buckled in. Through the window, ground crew loaded luggage with choreographed precision. Christine appeared beside his seat with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus Crawford?" She glanced at his unaccompanied minor tag. "Great, another one. You know the rules, right? Stay seated. Don't bother other passengers. Don't touch anything." "Yes, Mom." Marcus's voice was small. She made it sound like he was cargo instead of a passenger. "And I saw those little wings." She tapped his jacket with one manicured nail painted deep burgundy. "Cute, but this isn't playtime. Real aviation is serious business." She moved on before Marcus could respond. He touched the wings gently. They weren't cute. They represented 52 Sunday mornings learning regulations with his father. They represented every airport visit, every simulator session, every emergency scenario they'd practiced at the kitchen table. His father had separated from his mother, but he'd never separated from teaching Marcus what mattered. The plane pushed back from the gate. Marcus pressed his face to the window, watching the terminal slide away. For most passengers, this was just a flight. For Marcus, it was proof he could navigate the adult world alone. He didn't know that world was about to test him in ways no 10-year-old should face. 2 hours into the flight, service carts rattled down the aisle dispensing drinks and pretzels. Marcus was reviewing his father's safety manual on his tablet when the woman's scream shattered the cabin's mechanical hum. "Help! Someone please help!" Row 14. A man slumped against the window, his breathing shallow and rapid. His wife clutched his arm, terror bright in her eyes. Christine and 2 other attendants converged. They pulled the medical kit from overhead storage, hands shaking slightly despite their training. Christine barked orders, but Marcus noticed her movements were wrong. She was checking pulse incorrectly. She wasn't following the defibrillator protocol his father had drilled into him. Marcus stood. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Emergency procedures exist because seconds matter. If you see something wrong, speak up." He moved into the aisle. "Excuse me," Marcus said, louder this time. "My father works for the FAA. He taught me the proper emergency medical response for aircraft. You need to—" Christine whirled on him. Her professional mask cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. Annoyance, contempt. "What did I tell you about staying in your seat?" "But the protocol says—" "The protocol?" Christine stood, abandoning the collapsed man. She projected her voice across nearby rows. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We have a child who thinks he's a doctor because Daddy lets him play with toy planes." Scattered laughter erupted. "Son, this is real life. Adults are handling it. Sit down now." A businessman in 22A chuckled. "Kids got too much imagination these days." A woman across the aisle shook her head. "My nephew does the same thing. Makes up stories about his parents to sound important." Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. "I'm not making it up. My dad is Director James Crawford. He oversees airline safety compliance for—" "Sure he does." Christine's smile was venom wrapped in lipstick. "And I'm sure he'd be very disappointed to know his son disrupts emergency responses with fantasy stories. If you stand up again, I'll have to restrain you for the safety of this aircraft. Understand?" Marcus's throat closed. Around him, passengers nodded approvingly at Christine's authority. One woman actually applauded. The collapsed man groaned weakly, but nobody was watching him anymore. They were all watching Marcus's humiliation. He stumbled back to his seat, buckled in, stared at his hands. The aviator wings on his jacket felt like a joke now. Like maybe Christine was right. Maybe he was just a kid playing pretend. The medical emergency resolved itself when the man regained consciousness. Christine announced it was just a panic attack, her competence restored in everyone's eyes. But in first class, a man with graying temples set down his phone. He'd recorded everything. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cold window. Below, farmland spread in geometric patterns, peaceful and indifferent. Up here, his face burned with shame that wouldn't fade. Every whispered conversation nearby felt aimed at him. The toy plane boy, the liar. He replayed Christine's words in his head. Fantasy stories. But they weren't fantasies. His father's voice was real. The regulations were real. The Sunday morning lessons were real. FAA Manual Section 1-21.580, Medical Emergency Procedures. He could recite it from memory. That wasn't imagination. That was preparation. The woman in 22B glanced at him with pity. Pity was worse than mockery. It meant she thought he was damaged, desperate for attention, making up important parents to feel special. Marcus wanted to show her his father's business card, the one he carried in his wallet, but that would just make him look more pathetic. His fingers found the aviator wings again. They felt different now, heavier. His father had said, "These represent integrity, Marcus. It means doing what's right even when it's hard, even when people don't believe you." Was this what he meant? This crushing weight of being dismissed? Outside, Clouds drifted past like witnesses who'd seen everything and said nothing. Marcus closed his eyes. 3 more hours until landing. 3 more hours of sitting in the wreckage of his credibility. He'd wanted this flight to prove he was grown up enough to navigate the world alone. Instead, it proved adults could be crueler than any turbulence. But somewhere under the shame, a different feeling stirred. Not defeat, something harder. His father always said the truth doesn't stop being true just because people refuse to see it. Marcus opened his eyes. The wings caught the cabin light, glinting with quiet defiance. The memory came unbidden. Marcus, age 7, sitting at the kitchen table, while his father spread out aviation charts like treasure maps. "Most people think the FAA just makes rules," James Crawford had said, tapping a document with his finger. "But we save lives, Marcus. Every regulation exists because someone didn't make it home." That was before the separation, before the quiet arguments behind closed doors turned into Mom crying in the bathroom and Dad sleeping at the office. But even after they split, even after weekends became the only family time, James never stopped teaching. If anything, he taught harder, like he was trying to give Marcus something that couldn't be divided by custody arrangements. Sunday mornings became their ritual. While other kids watched cartoons, Marcus learned emergency protocols. If you see a pilot violating communication procedures during turbulence, what do you do? James would quiz him while making pancakes. Marcus would recite the regulation numbers like multiplication tables. Last Christmas, James had presented the aviator wings in a small box wrapped in gold paper. "You've completed the equivalent of initial safety training," he'd said formally, pinning them to Marcus's jacket. "These aren't toys. They mean you understand responsibility. You understand that silence in the face of safety violations isn't just wrong, it's dangerous." Marcus had worn them everywhere since, to school, to the grocery store, to bed sometimes, until Mom gently unpinned them so he wouldn't roll onto them in his sleep. They connected him to his father across the miles between their separate homes. Now at 32,000 feet, those lessons felt like ghosts. Had his father prepared him for this? For the crushing reality that knowledge means nothing when you're small? That authority doesn't care about truth if truth comes from a child's mouth, but James had also taught him something else. A memory surfaced, his father's voice serious as a regulation. "Marcus, there will be times when adults are wrong, confidently, publicly wrong. Your job isn't to make them like you. Your job is to speak up anyway, because silence has a body count." Marcus touched the wings. They weren't just decoration. They were a promise he'd made to his father, to himself, to every person who boarded a plane trusting that someone somewhere gave a damn about doing things right. Christine had humiliated him. The passengers had laughed, but the regulations his father taught him didn't stop being true just because no one wanted to listen. The question was, did he have the courage to speak up again? The turbulence hit like a fist. The plane dropped, recovered, dropped again. Overhead bins rattled. A cart broke loose and slammed against a seat. Passengers gasped, some screamed. Christine's voice crackled through the intercom, too casual for the violence shaking the aircraft. "Folks, just a little rough air. Keep those seatbelts fastened." But Marcus heard what she didn't say. His father had taught him to listen for protocol gaps, the spaces where procedure should be but wasn't. She hadn't announced their altitude, hadn't given the standard turbulence advisory code, hadn't followed the FAA mandated communication structure for severe weather encounters. Regulation 121.5557. During unexpected severe turbulence, crew must provide specific altitude, deviation authorization, and estimated duration. Christine had provided exactly none of that. Then the captain's voice. Folks, we're working through some weather here. Should smooth out soon. Marcus's pulse quickened. Should smooth out wasn't protocol language. His father had been explicit about this. Captains must use precise terminology. Should was uncertainty. Uncertainty was dangerous. The proper phrasing was we are diverting or we are maintaining course. Never should. He pressed his face to the window. The wing flexed more than normal. And there, a slight shimmer near the engine housing. Not smoke, but something irregular. Heat distortion. Fluid leak. Marcus had watched maintenance training videos with his father. This wasn't right. His heart hammered against his ribs. The medical emergency earlier replayed in his mind. Christine's incorrect pulse check. Her failure to properly document the incident. Now this. Sloppy turbulence protocol and possible engine irregularities. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were a pattern, and patterns killed people. Marcus's hands shook as he reached for the call button. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, stay small, avoid another humiliation, but his father's words burned brighter than his fear. Silence has a body count. He pressed the button. The chime cut through the cabin noise. Passengers nearby groaned. "That kid again," someone muttered. Christine appeared, her smile gone. "I warned you." "The engine," Marcus said, voice steady despite his trembling hands. "And the captain's turbulence communication violated FAA 121.557. I need you to check—" "That's it." Christine's voice was ice. "You're creating a safety hazard. I'm authorized to restrain disruptive passengers." Behind her, unnoticed by anyone but Marcus, a man in first class unbuckled his seatbelt. He wore an ivory shirt and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. He started walking toward them. His expression was carved from stone, and Marcus recognized him instantly. "Dad?" Christine's hand froze inches from Marcus's seatbelt. The color drained from her face like water down a drain. She straightened slowly, her confident posture crumbling as James Crawford approached through the turbulent aisle. He moved with quiet authority, one hand steadying himself against seat backs. His ivory shirt was crisp despite hours of flight. In his other hand, a leather credential wallet hung open. Even from rows away, passengers could see the gold federal badge. "Christine Morales, correct?" James's voice was calm, dangerously calm. "Lead flight attendant on Flight 447. Yes, sir." Christine's voice cracked. Her eyes darted to the badge, then to Marcus, then back. "Sir, you didn't realize my son was telling the truth." James stopped beside Marcus's row. He didn't touch his son, didn't acknowledge him beyond a brief glance. This wasn't about comfort, this was about procedure. "Or you didn't realize an FAA regional director was observing your in-flight operations?" The cabin had gone silent. Even the turbulence seemed to pause, waiting. Christine's professional mask shattered completely. "Sir, the boy, he was disrupting an emergency situation. I had to maintain order. By publicly humiliating a passenger who correctly identified protocol violations." James pulled out his phone. "I've recorded 3 separate regulation breaches in the past 90 minutes. Would you like to hear them?" Other flight attendants appeared from the galley, drawn by the commotion. They recognized the federal credentials. One whispered urgently into her phone, likely calling the cockpit. Christine's hands trembled. "Sir, if I may explain—" "You'll have opportunity to explain during the formal review." James's tone never rose, but it cut like surgical steel. "For now, I need you to step back from my son." She stepped back. The passengers who'd laughed at Marcus earlier suddenly found their phones fascinating. The businessman in 22A stared at his hands. The woman who'd applauded avoided all eye contact. James finally looked at Marcus. "Son, tell me about the engine." Marcus's voice was small but steady. "Left engine. Heat distortion near the housing. And the captain's turbulence protocol was incorrect. Good." James squeezed his shoulder once. "You did exactly right." James pressed the call button for the cockpit intercom. The system chimed, but no response came. He pressed again. Silence. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. "This is FAA Regional Director James Crawford. Authorization code Alpha 7 Delta 9. His voice carried authority that made the cabin feel smaller. "I'm requesting immediate cockpit communication regarding engine status and turbulence protocol compliance." 5 seconds passed. 10. Then the intercom crackled. "Sir, this is Captain Reynolds. We're handling the situation." The captain's voice was tight, defensive. "No need for alarm. Captain, I didn't ask if you were handling it. I asked for engine status confirmation and protocol verification." James's tone remained level. "Turn to federal regulation. My clearance supersedes in-flight command for safety review purposes. I can ground this aircraft the moment we land." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Passengers leaned forward unconsciously, witnessing something rare. Authority challenging authority. "There's a minor engine irregularity," the captain finally admitted. "We plan to log it after landing. Standard procedure. Logging mechanical irregularities after landing instead of immediately violates FAA 121.565. James pulled out a notepad, began writing. "How long have you been aware of this issue?" Silence. Then, "Approximately 40 minutes, sir." 40 minutes. James looked at Marcus, then at Christine, then at the rows of passengers who suddenly understood how close danger had been. "Christine, how long ago did my son first try to report safety concerns?" She couldn't answer. Didn't need to. Everyone knew the turbulence had stopped. But the real storm was just beginning. James lifted his phone again, began dialing. "I'm calling ground control to arrange immediate inspection upon landing. This aircraft is officially flagged for emergency safety review." Christine closed her eyes. Her career was ending at 32,000 feet. Christine retreated to the galley, her composure shattered like glass. Through the curtain, Marcus could see her leaning against the counter, head in hands. Another attendant stood beside her, speaking in urgent whispers. Their careers, their reputations, their certainty that they'd done everything right, all of it crumbling. The passengers sat in suffocating silence. No one ordered drinks. No one asked questions. They all understood what had almost happened. A child had seen danger, had spoken up, had been publicly mocked and dismissed. And all of them had participated in that dismissal. Their laughter echoed now like ghosts. The woman in 22B who'd called Marcus's claims imagination stared at her tray table. Her face was pale. The businessman who'd chuckled about kids these days had his eyes closed, jaw clenched. They'd laughed at a boy trying to save their lives. James sat down in the empty seat beside Marcus. For a long moment they didn't speak. Just sat together while the plane hummed through calmer air. Outside the window the sun was setting, painting clouds in shades of gold and deep burgundy. Finally Marcus whispered, "I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a kid making things up." "You were never wrong." James's voice was quiet, meant only for his son. "You were ignored. There's a difference." Marcus touched the aviator wings on his jacket. They didn't feel like a joke anymore. Didn't feel like toys. They felt like what they'd always been. Proof that knowledge has no age requirement. That truth doesn't need to be told to be valid. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. James looked toward the galley where Christine stood, then at the cockpit door. Now we land. And then accountability happens. The plane descended through the evening sky, carrying its cargo of shame, relief, and hard-earned lessons toward the ground. As the plane began its descent, James opened his tablet and began documenting. Marcus watched his father work with the same precision he'd witnessed during their Sunday morning lessons. Every violation, every timestamp, every witness. "The medical emergency response," James said, typing rapidly. "Walk me through what you observed." Marcus recited it like testimony. "She checked the pulse wrong. Used 2 fingers instead of 3 on the carotid. Didn't elevate legs for potential shock. Failed to document the incident immediately per 121-5580. And the turbulence protocol. No altitude announcement. No deviation authorization code. Captain used uncertain language instead of definitive status. Marcus's voice grew steadier with each violation. These weren't childish observations. They were evidence. James nodded, still typing. I've been traveling on random compliance flights for 3 months, checking if airlines follow protocol when they think no one's watching. This airline has been flagged before for crew training deficiencies. He glanced at Marcus. You caught violations I was monitoring for. You just happened to be my son. And you happened to be right. A flight attendant approached cautiously, not Christine. Sir, the captain asks if you need anything before landing. Tell the captain I need his incident log the moment we touch down. James's tone left no room for negotiation. Every entry from today. Hand Christine's training certification records. The attendant nodded and retreated quickly. Marcus leaned closer to his father. Were you always watching? Even when she was humiliating you? Yes. James closed the tablet, looked directly at his son. I wanted to intervene immediately, but I needed to see how far it would go, how systemic the failure was. If I'd stopped her after the first dismissal, I'd only have 1 violation. Now I have a pattern that proves training failure at multiple levels. So you let them make fun of me. Marcus's voice held a tremor of hurt. I documented them making fun of you while you were right. James's expression softened slightly. Sometimes the hardest part of doing what's right is waiting for the moment when the truth matters most. You gave me that moment, Marcus. Every word she said, every laugh from those passengers, that's evidence that this crew needs retraining or removal. The plane's wheels touched down with a screech. Through the window, Marcus could see emergency vehicles and FAA inspection crews already waiting on the tarmac. His father had called them during the flight. Justice didn't wait. The cabin remained silent as they taxied. No one applauded the landing. No one spoke. They all knew something significant had happened in the last few hours. Something that would follow them. The plane stopped at a remote gate surrounded by vehicles. 3 FAA inspectors boarded immediately, their credentials displayed. Behind them, airport security. The passengers weren't being detained, but no one was leaving until statements were taken. Christine stood near the galley, her face a mask of controlled panic. The other flight attendants kept their distance, as if her failure might be contagious. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his uniform somehow looking less crisp than before. James stood in the aisle, tablet in hand. An FAA inspector joined him, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. Director Crawford, we received your in-flight report. Inspector Patel. James gestured to Marcus. My son was the first to identify both the medical protocol failure and the engine irregularity. He attempted to report it 3 times. Each time he was publicly dismissed and threatened with restraint. Inspector Patel looked at Marcus, then at Christine. Is this accurate? Christine's voice shook. The child was disrupting an emergency situation, so I had to maintain cabin order. You couldn't know if a 10-year-old passenger was telling the truth. James's voice cut through her excuse like a blade. So your procedure is to mock and threaten children who report safety concerns. Sir, Christine stopped. There was no defense. The passengers had heard everything. Dozens of witnesses, and James's recording captured it all. Inspector Patel turned to Captain Reynolds. Captain, you were aware of engine irregularities for 40 minutes and didn't report it. It was minor. We were managing it. His voice lacked conviction. Minor or not, FAA 121.565 requires immediate reporting of all mechanical irregularities. Patel made notes on her tablet. Your flight log will be reviewed. You're suspended pending investigation. The captain's face went gray. Suspended meant grounded, possibly permanently. Patel addressed Christine next. Medical emergency response, turbulence communication failure, and dismissing passenger safety reports. You're looking at mandatory retraining at minimum, possibly termination depending on review. Christine's eyes filled with tears. Please, I've been flying for 12 years. I made a judgment call. You made 3 judgment calls. All wrong. All documented. James held up his phone. I have video of you telling surrounding passengers that children who report safety concerns are dangerous and attention-seeking. Those exact words. The cabin was silent except for the hum of auxiliary power. Passengers watched the confrontation like a courtroom drama. The woman in 22B looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. The businessman stared at his shoes. Inspector Patel closed her tablet. All crew involved will be interviewed separately. Passengers will provide statements. This aircraft is grounded until full inspection clears it. She looked at James. Your report was comprehensive, Director. Thank you. James nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt beside Marcus's seat so they were eye level. Tell Inspector Patel what you observed. Marcus took a breath, and in a clear, steady voice he recited every violation, every regulation number, every detail his father had taught him during those Sunday morning lessons. His voice didn't shake, didn't apologize. He spoke truth the way truth deserves to be spoken, with confidence and precision. When he finished, Inspector Patel smiled slightly. Son, you just prevented a potential in-flight emergency and exposed systemic training failures. That's commendable. Christine looked away, unable to face the boy she'd humiliated. The truth had landed heavy and undeniable. A child had been right, and hundreds of adults had been catastrophically wrong. 2 hours later, Marcus and James walked through the terminal together. Behind them, Flight 447 remained grounded, surrounded by inspection crews. Christine had been escorted away for formal review. Captain Reynolds faced a suspension hearing. The passengers had been rebooked on other flights, carrying stories they'd never forget. Several passengers had approached Marcus as they deplaned. The woman from 22B, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry. I should have listened. The businessman, voice thick with shame. You saved us, kid. I'm sorry for laughing. Marcus had nodded, accepting apologies that came too late but mattered anyway. Now walking through the quiet terminal, James stopped at a window overlooking the tarmac. The evening sky had deepened to navy, stars emerging like witnesses. He turned to Marcus, adjusting the aviator wings on his son's jacket. You know what these really mean now? James asked quietly. Marcus touched the wings. They felt different. Heavier with meaning, lighter with vindication. They mean speaking up even when no one listens, especially when no one listens. James squeezed his shoulder. Today you proved something I've always known. Truth doesn't have an age requirement. Safety doesn't care if you're 10 or 50. You saw violations. You reported them correctly, and you didn't back down when authority tried to silence you. Marcus looked at the grounded plane. What happens to Christine? Retraining, probably. She made bad calls, but she's not beyond learning. James's voice held something like compassion. Everyone fails sometimes. The question is whether we learn from it. They walked toward their connection gate together. This time, when Marcus boarded the new flight, the attendant saw his wings and smiled genuinely. Future pilot, future safety inspector, Marcus said confidently. James grinned. Maybe both. From his window seat on the new flight, Marcus watched the city lights spread below like scattered stars. Somewhere down there, Christine was facing the consequences of dismissing truth, because it came in a small package. Captain Reynolds was explaining to his supervisors why he'd ignored protocol, and dozens of passengers were telling friends and family about the day a 10-year-old boy saved their flight. Authority doesn't make someone right. Age doesn't make someone wrong. The truth exists independent of who speaks it. That's what Marcus learned at 32,000 feet, and that's what hundreds of adults learned the hard way. James closed his eyes beside him, finally relaxing after hours of documentation and interviews. Marcus touched the aviator wings one more time. They'd weathered mockery, survived humiliation, and emerged validated. Not because his father had defended him, though that mattered, but because the truth had defended itself. The new flight attendant stopped by their row with drinks. She glanced at Marcus's wings, then at his father's federal credentials. "You two have quite a story today, I heard." "We do," James said simply. She smiled at Marcus. "Keep speaking up, young man. The world needs people who do the right thing even when it's hard." Marcus nodded. Because now he knew the right thing is right regardless of who has the courage to name it. And silence, no matter how convenient, always costs more than truth. The plane climbed into the night sky, carrying lessons that would last far longer than the flight itself. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message, and justice doesn't need altitude, it just needs truth.